Alrighty, Howard, what is up? This is going to be the block overview video for your first block. So right now, I have written a 4-week block that kind of times us into around the time that you are leaving for your trip. And the way that the timing is actually going to work out into the meet, we'll probably actually end up running a kind of like deload week at the end of this block. So that way, like most of the training that you're going to be doing while you're away is going to be very, very light stuff. So it won't be that big of a deal at all, especially with the 3 time a week frequency. That's much better than training once a week or twice a week. So at least you're going to be getting those touches, not detraining, and then going to be able to go straight into a block and be able to basically continue the momentum that we're hopefully going to gain here. So I'll start off by just kind of giving an overview of the spreadsheet and then talking about the communication requirements a little bit more in depth, and then going over the actual program itself. So up here, I have my coaching schedule, which is basically just a Google Calendar of what I'm doing each week and when I am open for communication, when I'm not open for communication. I tend to mute my WhatsApp when I train, and I also tend to be a little bit slower to responses when I am programming. And I typically program on Saturdays and Sundays. So if you shoot me a text on those days, response times might be a little bit slower. And then during the week, if you text me around like noon-ish, I'm probably training around then. And then outside of that, pretty much open all day. And then my WhatsApp mutes once again at around 8 o'clock at night, and then unmutes at around 8 o'clock in the morning. So depending on what time you are training, if you are someone who prefers to train at night, we probably won't talk until the morning of the next day. And then if you are someone that trains in the middle of the day, most likely we'll be chatting a good bit day of. As I said, we do use Stripe. So over here I have a little customer portal. It takes you to the customer portal for the Stripe account that you kind of create once you go and put your payment method in. So you just sign in with the email that you provide when you initially make the payment, and then boom, you're able to change your card or kind of do whatever you need to do if that ever comes around. Athlete name, start date of the block, end date of the block, and again, this is kind of to be determined / a little wishy-washy since we're going to have that extra week to time things out. I have to double check again, but we'll kind of see how this block runs and then judge what we want to do by the end of it, depending on how fatigued you are and kind of what we're seeing results-wise. We have a little meet calendar over here, so the day or the name of your meet, as well as the date of the meet, which currently I know it's like a 2-day meet with the 16th and the 17th, so I've just put the 17th down for now. We have the amount of weeks out that you are, your competition PRs, your training PRs, and then up here I have a little calendar of your weekly split and kind of laid out which days are what when it comes to primary day, secondary day, tertiary day, and things like that. You will see, if you look at this compared to what you have been doing before, is a little bit different, right? We, as we talked about, took away your third squat day, and one of the things that we have to do when we take away a exposure like that, right? Like one of the reasons that your third squat day was working well for you before is because it provided an exposure closer to that primary day, right? So if that is the case and that was something that was feeling good, we probably should bring those exposures a little bit closer together to get a similar effect with a little bit less work, right? So I brought your primary day a little bit closer to your secondary day, and as well as I moved your primary deadlift day after your primary squat. And the reasoning for this is you are someone with pretty short arms and pretty, I don't want to say poor deadlift leverages, but you don't have amazing deadlift leverages, right? You do have very good squat leverages. You have a very efficient squat, a very upright, it seems, squat where you're not super hinged over. It seems like you recruit a lot of your quads, and obviously we'll kind of monitor and talk about your fatigue patterns once we actually get to going, but I'd much rather take advantage of the efficiency of your squat and get the most out of that, then go into your deadlift, which we know is already going to kind of be something that creates a little bit more fatigue, and kind of get the most out of that as well, but have that after we get the most out of your squat first, right? Like we can get a really productive squat, not necessarily incur a ton of fatigue from that, go into the primary deadlift the next day, not necessarily be completely demolished for it, still have a good performance, still get the stimulus that we're looking for there, and then, be able to progress as we kind of see fit. So that's something that we'll see. All of this is in theory. we could get to going, and it's just like, oh, after this, primary squat day, you just become absolutely thrashed, and you go into this primary deadlift and consistently feel like shit. Maybe that's the case, maybe that's not the case. Maybe you come in and you feel completely fine. It's again just a situation of, this is what we're going to start with. We're going to learn your fatigue patterns a little bit, and then going into next block, we'll make corrections, where need be with the microcycle. And then from there, everything else is pretty much the same, right? I've kind of lined up your secondary day 1 day closer to how you had it before, right? You had a 3-day gap prior where your secondary day was on Saturday, and then your primary day was on a Wednesday. So that gives you a 3-day exposure gap in between that secondary and primary day. So I brought that 1 day closer as well. And your bench microcycle, I kept exactly the same, right? That has been something that has obviously been working very well for you. So I don't want to make a ton of changes for that. But you will see, kind of programming wise, I did make, some tweaks to bring things back closer to what had worked really well for you, right? You are coming off of a block that went extremely well, and looking at the changes that you made for your projected week of training / next block, you did make a good bit of changes, right? And I kind of see the direction that you're looking to go in terms of you brought some of the reps up, and you're probably going to look to periodize over the course of a couple blocks and bring that back down to essentially what had worked well here. But as we'll kind of get into, a lot of the things that you were choosing to periodize were probably things that didn't need to be periodized or undulated, and you could have kept the same, right? And they probably would have created the similar result, and then you could allow the things that needed to progress to actually progress, or the things that needed to be undulated to undulate. As I said, we'll get into that in a little bit. Over here, I have a little exercise library, some random things that I might hyperlink into the sheet, a little movement prep section. But again, I don't expect us to have to prescribe you very much stuff there, seeing that you are a PT. And over here, we have the communication requirements. So this is a big thing. It's basically outlining what you need to take videos of during your sessions, what you need to be filling out on the spreadsheet, when should you be texting your feedback, and then what you should be including in your feedback. To make it short, right, what should you take videos of? The lifts, right? Take a video of your squat, take a video of your bench, take a video of your deadlift, right? And ideally in situations where you have a top set on this, and then a top set on this, and then a back down set on this, right? I'd want one video of each. I don't necessarily need both your sets of 7 in this situation, or I don't need all 3 sets of your tempo bench, but I would at least like one set of each. In addition to that, any accessories that I might label film. So in this case, I labeled the leg press as film, and I labeled the top set of your barbell RDLs as film, and I might make a note of film this specifically from the side. For example, we're going to really kind of dial in and look at your hinge here to see the mechanics on that. And then any movement that causes pain, or for whatever reason, if you're unsure how to do, which based off of what I prescribed here, I don't think that's going to be the case. But as opposed to saying oh, this movement hurts, I want to switch it to blah, blah, blah. A lot of the times I do like to see it before we decide to do something like that, just in case there are low-hanging fruit in terms of a different way that we could do it, or just a simple technique tweak in that movement itself to kind of make that non-painful, right? Sometimes that is the case. What do you need to fill out on the spreadsheet? So looking at each day, let's talk about what everything is. So up here, we have some external variables, right? So hours of sleep, hydration, estimated calories prior, post-session RPE, right? How difficult the session was, physical fatigue coming into a session, body weight, daily steps, duration of training, right? This is stuff that's optional. I do prefer if you can fill it out, but I'm not going to, look at the spreadsheet and say, oh my God, his whole week of, external variables isn't filled out. It is helpful, right? If I'm looking back at a section, or if I'm looking back at training and saying, this block went, really well, and I see that all of your externals were on point, and then we look at we're comparing that to the current block, and for whatever reason it's not going well, and I see that all the externals are going poorly, right? That's a situation where it's there's probably not so much to read into programming wise. It's just a situation of we're consistently having shitty externals and kind of need to accommodate for that. Aside from that, the 2 big columns to fill in are this actual RPE section, as well as the load, right? So ideally that is getting filled in for every single exercise, right? Accessories, load, actual RPE, even for these sets that are percent capped, right? Like this 3x4, for example, capped at 1%, I'd want you to rate the RPE of the final set, or just you can think of it as how difficult did I think this was on, as a whole. This 2x7, that's a percent drop, right? Rate the RPE for it, as well as, as I said, writing the load. especially for the accessories. It's really helpful over time, right? Because I do want you to be progressing your accessories, and as you see, the RPE for certain things kind of intentionally ramp up over the course of a block, and that's with the intention that you are intentfully progressing things to make sure that we are making the most progress with our accessories. And then aside from that, it's pretty much all you need to fill in on the spreadsheet. When should you text feedback? As we talked about in the onboarding call, post-session feedback are king. Always wait till after your session, or when you're finishing up your accessories, when you're getting in the car, when you're sitting on the toilet, whatever it may be, after your session, right? That is when you are going to be able to reflect in the most objective state of mind, right? When emotions are riding high after you hit an all-time PR squat or after you fail an all-time PR deadlift, whatever it may be, right? That is going to influence how you kind of display your feedback about the session. Whereas if you wait a couple hours, wait till you're done, you are going to come down from that high or that low, whatever it may be. You're going to be able to look at things a little bit more reflectively, a little bit more objective, and then we're going to get better feedback on a consistent basis that way. If for whatever reason you need to text me in the middle of the session, that's fine, right? Just make sure that it is important. Don't text me in the middle of the session saying, oh, what should I take for my last warm-up, right? Those are things that ideally you're asking prior to the session if you need help with that. Or, if there's an emergency, right? Like, hey, I just, broke my back, right? Whatever it may be. Like, I'd want to know about that. Obviously, if you break your back, we're probably not going to finish out a session, but like in cases where we might need to modify the rest of the session or whatever it may be. And then what should you include in your feedback? So over here, I have this fancy little communication checklist, which is basically detailing if you don't really know how to approach feedback. If you open this up and literally answer these questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, you are going to provide great feedback, right? So basically talk about how the session went. Did it go to plan? Did it not go to plan? And in each case, explain why. How well recovered you were for the session. Were you well recovered? Were you not well recovered? If you weren't, why weren't you, right? Did you have soreness somewhere? Were you fatigued somewhere? Where, right? And then provide your perspective on why you think that was the case, right? Do you think it was the hamstring curls that you did 3 days ago that, is making your hamstring sore today, right? Whatever the case may be, give me your thoughts, right? And then specific feedback, right, about how the bar felt on your back, technique. Did you feel practice? Did you not feel practice? Was the bar feeling heavy on your back? Was it feeling light on your back? Whatever those factors may be, and I kind of cover some of the points, the big ones, like do you feel full/flat? Do you feel like you have pop? Do you not feel like you have pop? Things like that. And then any aches or pains, right? Are you in pain or are you not in pain? And then any important updates, scheduling, life, whatever it may be, right? So if you don't know how to give feedback, that is how you give good feedback. If you do that for every session, I'm going to be able to take that and give you the best programming possible with that information in mind. So diving in now to your actual layout and what that is going to look like. So as I said, we have 4 blocks planned out, or 4 weeks planned out currently, and this ends us right around the time that you will be leaving for your trip. So we may end up having to move this session onto here. We'll see, just in terms of kind of like when exactly you're leaving on that day. But basically, going over the squat first, as I mentioned, we brought the gap between your primary day and your secondary day closer, right? Because we took out the tertiary day, we did need to do that because most likely, I'm assuming the reason that you added that in before was because you were feeling a little bit unpracticed by the time that your primary day came around. So bringing those exposures closer together is typically a good first thing to try before adding frequency, right? You always want to try to close the exposure gap prior to adding frequency. And that's just some low-hanging fruit in terms of programming where it's just like, hey, let's move these closer together. And if that magically makes things better, cool. If it doesn't, cool, right? And then you can kind of observe what the best option from there would be. But I would like to kind of try this out, see how things go. If we can get the top end on your squat to show up really well, to feel strong, to feel practiced, to feel like you have that pop, right? We're probably in a good spot and we probably don't need that tertiary day. Right? If we go throughout this block and squat absolutely tanks and it goes to shit and you feel super weak, we might need that tertiary day, right? That's something that we can easily just toss that back in next block, and that is, not a thing that creates such an adaptation, right? It's not this huge stimulus that creates an adaptation, so it's one of those things that like you pretty much are going to add that in and instantly see a result from that. So looking at your secondary squat day here, I did make some tweaks, right? Prior to the block that you currently, or the week that you currently wrote out for yourself, right? You were doing a top triple, back down sets of 5, right? And that was your secondary day. You You just had a 1x3, 1x5, 1x5. And I'm assuming the amount of work that you were doing here was a little bit lower because you had that tertiary day, right? And you also had a good amount of accessories here. And because we don't have that tertiary day anymore, right, I wanted to increase the workload a little bit. And accounting for your leverages, accounting for just how your squat looks, I'm, again, assuming that you're going to be able to handle a little bit more barbell squatting. In order to make sure that you come into that primary day feeling practiced, feeling good, right, I probably want you doing some higher reps, getting exposed to just some good, groove, some good practice. And that way you go into your primary day feeling practiced, you go in feeling good, right? You go in feeling confident. And then in addition to that, right, we want a bit of a heavier top set to kind of prime you so that you don't go into that primary day lacking intensity, right, with that barbell feeling super heavy on your back. So that is the purpose of this kind of lower rep top set here. And I'm aiming to keep the weight in a similar range that you had it prior. And just the pause here is going to create a little bit more of a stimulus there, right? Because again, we are taking some stimulus out, so I want to in turn add some back in. So the pause squat's simply going to make the same weight that you were doing prior heavier, right? It's going to make it harder. You're going to have to try harder to do that same amount of weight, but with a pause. And I think that in terms of just getting the squat to feel really good, pause squats are just awesome, right? They force you to really control that center of mass going into the hole. They force you to kind of be punished by not doing that as you're coming up out of the hole. So I think it's just a great variation, especially for someone that squats like you do. You're going to be able to kind of really feel how efficient your squat is. So we'll see how those go, right? We'll observe if we're getting the intended effect from that or not. And then we'll kind of, judge based on the results, whether it is working or if it's not. Looking at the tertiary bench here, or I'll go over the rest of squat first, then we'll go squat, bench, deadlift. Looking at your primary day squat, pretty standard kind of approach to how we're thinking about doing your reps and your sets. We're starting with a top set of 4 here. And based off of the timeline that we have to progress, this is something that we may kind of taper. We may taper it as the block goes on. Like I might bring you down to triples near the end of the block. 1, to just get a little bit of heavier weight on your back, but 2, just to make sure that we're, kind of lining things up for the meet. Because again, the way that things line up right now, if we were to run a 4-week block plus a deload week into another block plus a deload week into another block, that would put you exactly at the week of the meet, right? That would be with a taper week rather than kind of training into the meet. So the way that things are kind of panning out right now, I want to run this just to kind of get some heavier weight on your back and just seeing how things perform. And we might bring these down to triples at the end of the block, depending on, what we're seeing needs to get loaded. Then from there, I have a top set of 5 as before, right? You were running a top single, top triple, back down sets of 5. I personally find that, especially with the primary day, the lighter back down sets really don't need to get undulated all too much, right? You don't really need to periodize this. A lot of the times you're able to kind of stay within a certain range of weight and just make progress with that and feel good, right? Because if you think about it in the sense of like, what do these back down sets here serve? They're kind of feeding into your next squat session, right? So if this set of 5 is feeding into your secondary day, it's feeling solid, right? And then that secondary day is what's truly feeding into your primary day. That secondary day is more so what we're looking to kind of tweak and undulate based off of the responses that we're seeing on that primary day, less so than the back downs here. The back downs here are just kind of to like maintain a certain threshold of work to make you feel good, right? Like if we do too little work here, you're probably going to start to feel a little detrained, a little understimulated. Whereas if we do too much work, you're going to be accruing fatigue, right? From something that doesn't necessarily provide value, right? That is one thing that I definitely see a lot where it's like people really kind of over undulate and over kind of periodize these back downs. And that's not just a squat thing. I think that is applicable to, bench and deadlift as well. So the 2 main things that we'll really be looking to periodize on this day are this top set and this back down top set, right? And those will taper down as time goes on, basically ending up where exactly you had them before. But again, these back down sets are just going to kind of remain in the realm of kind of what you need to feel strong. And then in terms of accessories here, before you had twice a week pendulum squats, and just because of where your primary squat and primary deadlift are in proximity, Now, I didn't want to have pendulum squats the day before your primary deadlift. I didn't want to just absolutely thrash your quads. But again, if we notice that there is just a lack of work being done overall, right, we'll probably have to add those back in. I moved your Bulgarians / RFE split squats to your primary deadlift day here. And then I've also added in, once again, an extra set. So we have an extra set on your secondary day, an extra set on your primary day in those back downs. So the reps, total reps that you're doing per week is a little bit more than what you were doing before. So we shouldn't see an issue in terms of like feeling practiced, and then theoretically we shouldn't see an issue in terms of feeling primed, right? Because again, we do have that good intense exposure on the top set of that secondary day, but that's all theory, right? We gotta see how that actually pans out. In terms of the progression throughout the block, it's pretty standard. RP 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9 ish, and then we'll see how that progresses, and we'll kind of judge where we want to go from there. Looking at your bench, as I said, it's super similar to what you were doing before. We are starting with 3x4s, tempo 3x4s on your tertiary day, and I just percent capped those just because I don't necessarily see, or we will see if there is a reason, but I don't currently see a huge reason as to why we would need these to be anything more than kind of around this range of weight. If we start to see that you're missing some stimulation early on in that week, again, we'll kind of add that in, but this day is very much there for practice, right? This is the day feeding into your secondary day, which is technically like a second primary day. And that's the big day for, this is your exposure, right? This is your, heavy voluminous exposure. And then you have your primary day, which is your primary day for your, primary one, you could call it, right? This primary one, primary two, and then it's basically like primer, and then primary. So that session later on in the week is pretty much what primes you for your primary day, and this session is essentially priming you for your secondary day. So just a 3x4% capped, right? And we'll see if this is enough stimulus to get you into this day feeling good, feeling strong. If it's not, we'll tweak it. That's the beauty of the percent cap. And for your bench here, rolling with a top double, and then the back down sets of 8. Pretty much exactly what you were running before, right? You had the top double, the 1x6, 2x6, and then you've gone to change this new block into a 1x5, 1x8, 2x8. So one of the big things with a secondary day as someone who benches like how you bench, right? Especially when you have the 4 times a week frequency. This secondary day tends to need something that is pretty heavy on that top set, right? So undulating these reps back up to 5s might be too far removed from what is going to be heavy enough for you to really make progress. So I want to keep this in that lower rep range just to make sure that you're getting a heavy enough touch here, right? We might bring this down to a single next block. We might bring it up to triples. We might keep it at doubles, right? And allow these back down sets to undulate. And again, I'm going to kind of see what the response is in terms of how you're feeling on that primary day, because you did have, you hit 182. That's a huge bench, right? And a 170 double. So obviously things were going well, and we don't want to get too far away from that. And I think that undulating or periodizing some of the reps on like the tertiary day, secondary day, primer session and primary day is going to result in something that is too far removed from that. I don't want to say golden microcycle, but that microcycle that was obviously working very well for you. So we're going to be running that top double to maintain that intense exposure, right? And then I'm keeping the 8s here, top set 8, 2x8 with a -8 to 5 to 8% back down. So that should be a pretty decent low drop. And then we have the RPE cap there as well. I forgot to add a RPE cap on these guys too. So that is the same percent drop. And then looking at your primer bench session, right, it is exactly as you were doing before. Top single, 2 count, back down triples, just comp bench, right? It's pretty standard for someone with your kind of range of motion and pressing style. And again, we'll kind of undulate the volume and intensity as we kind of see fit. So this is, what we have down for now, but that is all subject to change. Accessories, keeping your flat bench here. Most of the accessories I kept the same. I did change the dumbbell curls to dumbbell incline curls, as well as your tricep, or I added in a tricep accessory here on your primary bench day, tricep cable kickback. Those are 2 exercises that are really good for just working on internal rotation of the shoulders, right? Which again, with your pressing style, is something that we do go through a good bit. And aside from that, pretty much all the other accessories are things that you were doing before, just either moved around or kind of stacked in different ways, right? I moved a leg press onto this day 2 session. Aside from that, we've moved a couple things onto your primary deadlift, and then the rest of it is essentially what you were doing before, right? For that kind of stuff, it's mostly just like there's so many options that you can do. So if you're bored of this stuff, like let me know and I can change it up. But again, it's more so that you were doing something that was very obviously working very well for you. I don't want to get too far away from that. And then finally, looking at your primary bench day, once again, this is the day that we want to be performing very well, right? We want that top end to show up very well. And you were running top double, top single, 3x4 back down, right? So I said, okay, right, that was obviously working very well. Top double into a fatigue single into the 4s on back downs. So let's once again keep it pretty similar, right? Let's not get too far removed from that. So in order to give you some room, since that 170 and that 182 were hard as shit, right? Let's give you some room by bringing the reps back up to triples instead of focusing on the doubles. Make the single, a couple 2.5, 5, 7.5 kilos heavier than that top triple, right? It doesn't need to be RPE bajillion. You'll see as the block progresses on, we get to around like 9 to 9.5 for that final triple, and then that single is only going to be 8.5 to 9, right? And I want to keep this a very true 8.5 to 9, so that way it's like it's load limited in that sense, right? We're not going to go above 182. Most likely, it's probably going to be a little bit less, good bit less. We'll see. And then we have the 3x4 back downs at percent capped, bumped about 2%-ish each week. That is pretty standard. And again, we'll kind of tweak that as we see fit to make sure that we're doing enough work overall. Then finally, the deadlift. The deadlift here, I did make a couple changes. And looking at the tweaks that you made to your new block going from your previous block, there were a couple things that stood out to me, right? Before, you had your RDLs on your primary deadlift day, right? And as someone who, again, these are all just assumptions, right? Longer range of motion on deadlift, shorter arms, probably going to incur a little bit more fatigue from the movement compared to something that you're better well leveraged for, like a squat, right? That is someone that fits the mold perfectly of really being able to take advantage of those hinge-based movements to progress their deadlift, right? Hence why you threw in those RDLs and it felt amazing, right? And your deadlift has made a ton of progress since your last meet, right? You pulled 260, which I remember you saying this was the second attempt and you failed your third, but still, that's great progress. And this 260 moved with room in the tank. So things are obviously going well. So I want to lean into that a little bit more, where we're prioritizing the RDLs as a means to kind of stimulate, right? And the primary day is here because we want to, be stimulating on this day, especially with the deadlift. So I'm running with a top triple here, right? Which is going to be that set to get some heavier weight in your hands to just practice overall, right? And then we have those back down sets, which are a pretty substantial drop in weight from the top set. We bumped that up to a 2x3 after the first week, just again, to make sure that we're doing enough reps from the floor overall. And then the RDLs following that in an ascending fashion. I really like ascending sets for the RDLs because, again, it just is a weird movement in terms of gauging RPE. So doing it in an ascending scheme kind of allows you to kind of nail that RPE on the final set a little bit more and just push things overall, right? You do one set and then you're like, I obviously had more room in the tank. I have to go up, right? As opposed to, it's pretty easy to undershoot an RDL, and I want to push these pretty hard, especially when we're further out from the meet, so that gives us a little wiggle room in terms of progress to make going into the meet. Once again, strap up for these, film it from the side, and we'll kind of see what's there. And then we have the lower body accessories on this day, so we can get a massive juicy pump. And then looking at your secondary deadlift day, this day is a little bit more geared, again, towards setting you up with that stimulus that you need to come in strong for the primary. So that is here coming in the form of these ascending pause deadlifts on top of the leg press that I am looking to kind of have that be the sweet spot that leads you into your primary squat and primary deadlift feeling really good, right? And we'll see, right? Because again, this is all experimental. These are tweaks that, may work well, may not work well. They're just kind of hunches on my end that I would think would work well for someone of your demographic. And I want to keep the reps, right? Having the reps lower on the deadlifts here for someone like you is great, right? Like you, as I said, are going to incur more fatigue as those reps on the deadlift start to creep up, right? You're just going to generally get more beat up from deadlifts, right? At least from the floor. So I want to keep these low, but I also want to make sure that you're getting enough practice to feel good come that primary day, right? Pause deadlifts are a great way to enforce that, especially when you have a nice flow for your start position and just generally good technique, right? I think that using a pause deadlift with someone that doesn't have good technique is an easy way to just enforce that bad technique. And your pull is pretty clean, right? Technique wise, your pull is pretty clean. So I'm very kind of confident that you're going to benefit from pause deadlifts. You were doing a pause top set before and then comp back downs with the same weight. So I wouldn't even necessarily call that a back down. I would call it like a repeat set. But this ascending scheme allows us to kind of really nail the RPE for this, heavier paused top set, as well as potentially get even more weight on the bar than you were getting prior, right, with a pause deadlift that should prime you really well for that primary day, right? And we'll see if it ends up being a situation where like the pauses are creating a little too much fatigue, and then we can swap those to comp, right? We have a lot of options here. We have a lot of flexibility. So it's kind of just going to be like, let's see how these go. Let's see what works. And then we'll make adjustments as we see fit. So Howard, that is pretty much it. Looking at this now and kind of explaining things, I'm debating whether I want to bring these down to triples currently. And I think I am going to do that because thinking about it in my head now, right, I wrote these as 4 with the intention that, by the end of the block, we'll kind of taper that down to a triple and just hit a heavier set. It'll be a lighter RPE. But I might just start these at triples just to make sure that, again, we're timing that properly into the meet. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Right. So I'm going to bring these down to triples. And that way, that times things a little bit better into the meet. And then we just go into doubles and then singles, and that's perfect. Everything else staying the same. Give this a watch over. I know it's a lot, right? It's 31 minutes, a yap. But give it a watch. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have thoughts, suggestions, right? I'm very open to tweaking a lot of this if we think that it's necessary, right? I want to hear your reasoning for why you would want to change something, but I also want to make sure that you are bought into what I have written here and that you agree with or kind of see the vision in that sense of what I'm looking for or looking at or thinking here. So that is it. I will send this over to you along with the Stripe link, and then probably on Sunday, because I'm reffing all day on Saturday tomorrow, I won't be available to do a lot of programming tomorrow. Probably on Sunday, I'll make your technique overview video, which, surprise, surprise, is not a lot. There's not a lot to go over because you have a very good base of technique right now. And then we'll go from there, right? After the technique video is done, after give this a watch, and then after you fill out the Stripe payment, we're good to go. We're good, ready to start on Monday. And that's pretty much it. So let me know what you think. We'll go from there. I will see you in the next one. Peace.